Let's set the scene. It's February 2026, and the entire world is basically holding its breath. The United States and Iran are squared up, staring each other down on the absolute brink of war. It's this incredibly high-stakes game of political chicken, and the consequences could be massive for everyone. So we're going to break down how we got here and what was truly on the line.
And if you want to understand the stakes, it really boils down to this one number: 20%. That's how much of the entire planet's daily oil supply squeezes through one single incredibly narrow strip of water, a waterway that's right at the heart of this whole crisis. And it could be shut down in a heartbeat.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at how things got so bad. Then we'll get into the two competing paths, war and diplomacy. After that, the all-important Hormuz choke point. Then we'll decode the possible outcomes using a key market analysis. And finally, we'll ask what happens next.
Right. So let's get one thing straight. This crisis didn't just pop up out of thin air. Not at all. It was really the final step in a long series of escalations, of very deliberate strategic moves that basically set the stage for this massive confrontation.
And this timeline, well, it really shows you just how fast things went downhill. It all kicks off in June 2025 with the U.S. military strike called Operation Midnight Hammer. Fast forward to December, and the Trump administration's official strategy labels Iran as the chief destabilizing force in the region. That's not just words. That policy decision leads right into January 2026, when a huge U.S. military buildup begins, bringing us to this critical boiling point in February. In this image, this gives you a real sense of the military power involved. The strikes back in June 2025, Operation Midnight Hammer, used B-2 bombers just like this one. They dropped these massive bunker-buster bombs on Iranian nuclear sites. It was sending a crystal-clear message that the U.S. was willing to act alone, and that message was ringing very, very loud as this new crisis took shape.
But here's what makes this whole situation so incredibly tense, so precarious. It's the paradox right at the center of it. You see, even as both sides were gearing up for a fight, they were still talking. It's like they were walking down two completely different roads at the exact same time, and nobody knew which one they'd choose.
Yeah, look at this contrast. It's wild. On one hand, you have the U.S. moving aircraft carriers and fleets of fighter jets into the area. And what does Iran do? Its Revolutionary Guard starts running its own live-fire naval drills. It's pure military posturing. But then, at the same time, you've got diplomats meeting in Geneva for another round of talks, trying to find an off-ramp. And back in Washington, the mood was grim. According to a report from Axios, an advisor inside the Trump administration put the odds of military action at a staggering 90%. I mean, think about that. That doesn't sound like a negotiation, does it? That sounds like a countdown. It really showed just how ready they were to pull the trigger.
So, while the drums of war were beating louder and louder, the diplomatic track was just stalling. The talks in Geneva were happening, sure, but they ended without solving any of the big issues. There was no breakthrough, no magic solution. And that just made the military option look more and more inevitable.
Now, to really understand why this was such a big deal, we have to talk about geography. We have to zoom in on what is easily one of the most important pieces of real estate on the entire planet, the Strait of Hormuz. You can think of it as a vital artery for the whole global economy.
And the numbers? They're just mind-boggling. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, every single day, something like 20 million barrels of oil and petroleum products flow through that little strait. And on top of that, almost 300 million cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. This isn't just some regional squabble. It's a direct pipeline for the world's energy.
And the key thing to remember is, this wasn't just a potential threat, some abstract idea. The strait was already a live fire zone. I mean, on February 3rd alone, U.S. forces shot down an Iranian drone and stopped an attempt to board a tanker. Then, just a couple of weeks later, Iran ran military drills that partly closed the waterway. And bam, global oil prices spiked immediately. The friction was already there, and it was creating sparks.
So the whole situation is on a knife's edge. How are the experts, the markets, how are they trying to make sense of all this? Well, that brings us to our next section, where we're going to dig into a really influential market report that tried to calculate the odds and figure out what could happen next. And to do that, we are turning to the Phil Stock World Morning Report from February 19th. Now, this analysis was a huge deal at the time. It basically became the lens that investors were using to try and navigate all this extreme uncertainty, laying out what they saw as the most likely scenarios and what they'd mean for the economy.
Okay, so the report really broke it down into two main possibilities. The first one they called the Tehran pivot. and they gave it a 30% chance. The theory here was that Iran was intentionally creating this crisis so they could then swoop in, offer a diplomatic solution, and get a big PR win. If that happened, oil prices would probably tumble. But then there was the other scenario, the kinetic accident, a 15% chance. This isn't a planned war. This is a miscalculation. A ship hits a mine, a plane gets shot down by mistake, something that triggers a real shooting war and sends oil prices absolutely soaring past $100 a barrel.
So, what was the advice for investors? Well, here was their conclusion. They basically said you absolutely cannot bet against oil right now. The risk of war, what they called the gunboat diplomacy premium, was already baked into the price. But the risk that some kinetic event could cause a sudden massive spike in price, that risk was just way too high to mess with. The defining feature of the whole market was just pure, raw uncertainty.
Okay, for our last section, let's pull the camera back one more time and look at the global stakes. Because when you get past all the military moves and the market analysis, this standoff had very real and very sweeping implications for pretty much everyone.
And amidst all this tension, there's another jaw-dropping number we have to talk about. $1 billion. According to that same Philstock World report, that's the extra money oil companies were making every single day just because the crisis was driving up prices. It's a pretty stark reminder that even on the brink of war, someone, somewhere, is making a fortune.
So why does any of this matter to you? Well, first, energy prices. A real conflict would mean a sudden, pretty painful spike in what you pay for gas. Second, the global economy. A disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would send shockwaves through supply chains, affecting everything from manufacturing to the price of the stuff you buy. And finally, and maybe most importantly, regional stability. A war, even one that starts by accident, could reshape the Middle East for generations to come.
And that just leaves us with the one final question hanging over everything. With military forces on high alert, with diplomats walking a tightrope, and with the entire global economy watching, was this whole standoff going to end in some kind of historic breakthrough or in a devastating and maybe even accidental war?